Harold Middeldorf, born 1937, born and bred in Rhodesia. My father was born in Galicia, in a town called Ropschitz, but as a baby went to live in Blackpool. And when he came to South Africa, he actually had an English accent. My mother was born in Shelib in Poland, and they met in Rhodesia. My father came to Rhodesia in 1913, and they lived in Gwelo, and my sister Hazel was born in Gwelo, but the family moved to Kwekwe. Now, Kwekwe didn't have a maternity home, so my mother had to go to Salisbury to give birth, and that's where I was born, but went back to Kwekwe, a lovely little mining town, and I was there till about age 4. Afterwards, the family moved to Salisbury.
What were your parents doing in Kwekwe?
In furniture. We had a furniture store, and then they went to Salisbury, and I went to begin with to David Livingstone School, then to Blakiston Junior School, and after that to Prince Edward High School. Rhodesia has fond memories when we think about it sometimes, because the life was pretty laid back. There was no real apartheid as such, and the blacks were very pleasant, and I think their general life was pretty good altogether, even though they were servants. As time went on, I joined Habonim, like most Jewish children, and it was the center of our lives for a long time. And the weekend meetings that we had every year between Bulawayo and Salisbury created a lot of friendships between people. To this day, they are connected, and we still have great friendship. As time went by, I took up an apprenticeship as a compositor, not in the orchestra, but as a compositor. And as time went on, I also worked a 5-year apprenticeship, and I worked for the Rhodesian Herald for a time as well. And during that time, still being in the movement and becoming a madrich, and later on the Bakoach of Rhodesian Habonim, following on from Mickey Weinstock, Isaac Beneshi, Gaby Heimovitz, and Mervyn Lisowski, and everything evolved around the movement. And I met a nice girl. She was a chanicha in the movement, and we eventually got married. And Lily and I left the country. But before that, I'd like to mention that because the life in Israel, in Rhodesia, was so laid back, we had time for sports and we had time for pleasure. We used to go to Mermaid's Pool, where everybody used to go and have picnics, to Lake McElwain, and generally, and to the sports club, to Wingate Sports Club, where we played golf, tennis, and swimming. So we had time for all those things. And while working in the printing office, it was a very big business, and in my department, in the composing department, there were 3 Jewish boys, and when one year Rosh Hashanah came up, the 3 of us wanted to take off 2 days for the Rosh Hashanah Chag. The management were most upset that 3 boys from one department would take off, and he said, we don't care how you do it, but one of you has to be here during those times, and you can arrange between you who it will be. We didn't know what to do, so we consulted with Reverend Converser, and I think Reverend Converser consulted with Sir Roy Walensky, who at the time was the Prime Minister. And when I got home, my father, who was very anti-Jewish and anti-religious, said that if the manager said that you have to come, you will not go. And if he would have asked you nicely and you want to go, be my pleasure. On Rosh Hashanah you can do whatever you like. But if he told you that you have to come, don't go. But we didn't go, the 3 of us. We didn't go to, and the 3 of us was Alan Lewis and Bill Wigger and myself. We never went. And when we got back, no word was said, nothing was mentioned. And I think they realized that when they went up to Roy Walensky that he was going to put his foot in it. And as time went on, as I said, we got married to a lovely girl, and that same day we went on honeymoon, and we never went back. Our trip to Europe included Israel. We redeemed part of the air tickets that we had, and we remained on, and we always boasted that we was always on honeymoon. We never completed our circuit. 1 year after we'd been here...
What year was that, Harold?
In 1962. 62. And 1 year later, my sister Hazel did a big job of organizing the few belongings that we had and sent them in a lift to Israel. Included in that lift, there was the top layer of the wedding cake from the year before, and it was as fresh as the day that we got married. And during that time, I was looking to go into the printing business. I might mention also, through the movement, I visited Israel in 1957 on the Machon Chorif arrangement, and there were several Rhodesians with us in that group. It was a big group from South Africa. There was Felice Jolson at the time, Basil Walbaum, Alan Schreier, the late Alan Schreier, and Alan Mandelstam from Bulawayo, and Jerry Katzenberg was also on that group. And that also put a bit of interest in Israel for me. And when the time that we got married and left Rhodesia, I felt that Rhodesia was more or less getting to an end, and there was no point in going back to there. So that's why we stopped here. Alan, the late Alan, and I opened a printing business, but it didn't last very long because the big recession before the Six-Day War put us out of business. So Alan went into insurance.
Where was that?
In 19...
Where was that, Harold?
Where had the business?
Where did you...
In Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv. And we parted ways. Alan went into insurance, and I carried on with somebody else in the printing business as a plant manager. And as time went by, someone said, "Why don't you try the insurance business?" I said, "Me? Talk to people about death and ask them for money for it? That's not for me." Anyway, things turned out, and I went into the life insurance business, and I must say that I was glad that I did. Managed to help a lot of people. And that's how we got to Israel. And unfortunately, Lily passed away after a long illness. And that's how we got to Israel. But there are still things that we remember about Rhodesia and the times and the good times that we had.
Did you ever go back to visit?
Yes, I went on 2 occasions, and we even visited Gus and Paulette at their house for coffee. In fact, they used to live next door to Lily's parents in Rhodesia, Van Prague Avenue. That all the Jews lived in Van Prague. And the fact that Lily was also from the Sephardi community, it shows that there are quite a few mixed marriages, as they were called.
What was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Capeluto. And that's how we met.
So how did it feel to go back when you did go back?
It was like going anywhere else to have a holiday. We visited various places. One little story, we went to visit somebody. I was there with the children because it was school holidays here. And we went to visit somebody. This was in 1967. Sorry, 1970. Sorry, it doesn't matter. And Dudi, my son, was with me. We went to visit somebody. And I heard them discussing something with one of the African workers there. And they were giggling. So I said to my son, "What is he laughing about?" He said, he asked me why I'm not at school. And I told him that I'm a tourist. And he thought I meant a terrorist. Because that was the time when all the terrorist business going on in Rhodesia. So that was the story of Rhodesia.
Can you just talk a little bit about your parents and their story?
Well, my father, as I said, came to South Africa in 1913.
What brought him out?
To Rhodesia in 1913.
To Rhodesia. He came, his father, my grandfather.
In about 1910 to Cape Town, yeah.
He got a job there in the community, my grandfather, so the children were there as well. My father didn't like the idea of going to school, so he already started looking for a job and was a wanderer. And by the age of 15, he already came to Rhodesia and was doing all sorts of jobs. He had all kinds of jobs that were available. A lot of helping people in these African stores. They needed helpers. And because he knew the language and he didn't
Buying cattle?
he did everything that was
Yeah.
possible, I think, in Rhodesia. My mother was a bit more laid back. She came with her sister, and as I said, she lived in Gwillow and then in Kwekwe and then in Salisbury, and she was quite religious, and she kept a kosher home, and it was nice to be that way, and I learned a lot from her as well. And apart from the movement, the Habonim movement, the shul was also a center of all of our activities, and we used to go there for all the chagim and often on Shabbat. So that's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add?
Nothing that I can think of. There's lots that have gone by and so on, but that's about summarizes.
And if you were to summarize your experience of growing up there, how would you summarize it?
I would say wonderful. We had time to do everything, and everything. The servants did everything for us. We used to go on holiday, and Habonim was also again the center of everything, and it was an opportunity to go to the seaside in East London to Habonim camps, and part of the whole enjoyment was being on the train. That was where a lot of friendships were made, because we were together for 2.5 days on the train, going there and back. And the growing up was very easy. Everybody had their bicycle, and we used to go and play sports and do whatever. I, with a team of friends, Norman Jumbo Ross, Don Meller, and Alan Schreier and myself, we started a table tennis team called the Squad, and we used to play in the league, table tennis league in Salisbury.
Are you older than Hazel?
No.
And how you just the two siblings?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the two.
And Hazel and Jen followed. You came later than
Yes,
you.
we came to Israel in 1962, and Hazel and Jen, and unfortunately my mother passed away before she could come to visit us here. She was very pleased about our decision to stay in Israel, and in 1977 Hazel and her husband Jen came to Israel, and they brought my father with them, and he was with them and lived with them until he passed away some years later at the age of 93.
Mashallah.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Well done, Harold.